Hey everybody, sorry about the dorky headset. I'm babysitting my baby nephew, and you should not wake up a sleeping baby. It is a bad idea. So I'm wearing this so I can talk a little bit more quietly, and you can still hear me. So, anyway, recently, ever since Nintendo announced the new 3DS, I did an editorial talking about it. But I've heard a lot, both comments on that editorial, but also just throughout the internet, people talking and trying to figure out and debating whether or not the new 3DS is actually Nintendo's new handheld, or if it is more an iteration on the 3DS itself. And there are kind of two arguments that exist for this. The people who say that this is more an iteration and not the new generation would compare it, and this is the best argument I've heard for this, would compare it to the Nintendo 64 expansion pack, which went in your Nintendo 64 and would essentially just add some memory to the system and allow it to do a little bit more. Some games like Perfect Dark, Battlezone, games like that, if you had the expansion pack in, it would make the game run better, but you could run it without it. And then there were also some games like Donkey Kong 64, Majora's Mask, games like that that actually required the expansion pack in order to be played. So the argument is that that is essentially what the new Nintendo 3DS is that there will be games that will run on both of them, but they might run a little bit better on the new 3DS, and then there will also be some games, like Xenoblade, that only run on the new 3DS. And that's a very good argument. I just heard that argument yesterday, and that's pretty convincing. I'm going to kind of run through both sides of it, and not tell you really which side is right, just kind of present the information from both sides. So that's the iteration argument. The other side would argue that because the new 3DS has retail released software that cannot be run on the previous system, but is backwards compatible with the previous system, that makes it a new system. That's no different than the 3DS to the original DS. The 3DS could run DS software, but there's also software made only for the 3DS. And kind of the question that's brought up is that why isn't there then a larger lineup of games for this new console if it is indeed a completely new console? There's a little bit of guessing here, but what I'm going to put forward is that in Japan right now, Japanese 3DS sales have kind of plummeted. The 3DS is pretty much competing fairly evenly with the Vita. I believe it's still doing a little bit better, but 3DS sales have seen a huge drop-off in Japan. They've seen drop-offs all over the world. I think last year was kind of the golden age of the 3DS, and now it's sort of starting to tail off. A lot of people saying that's ridiculous, but that's because they're comparing it to the DS, which had an insanely long life cycle and was extremely successful. The 3DS is not as successful as the original DS, and that's just the way it is. Here's the deal. Nintendo is looking at the holiday season in Japan this year. The thing about Japan, as compared to a place like America or many other places around the world, is in Japan, handheld gaming is much more popular than console gaming. And so, whereas in the rest of the world, Nintendo feels like they can trust, they have Mario Kart 8 and they have Super Smash Bros. U to carry the Wii U this holiday season, and that's going to be their big seller, not the 3DS. In Japan, they're seeing what has been their big seller drop off, and while, obviously they're going to sell Wii U's, they're not going to sell as well there as they are here. So Nintendo looks at that and they say, okay, we need to do something. And so to me, what it seems like is they're kind of doing an early soft release for the new 3DS. If you look at the Nintendo Direct, and obviously it's in Japanese, but you can still figure out what they're talking about. They're kind of promoting this new 3DS as, one, the best way to play the new Monster Hunter game coming out for 3DS in Japan, which is a huge deal. Monster Hunter, it's somewhat popular here, but it is insanely popular. It's huge in Japan. Those games are system sellers. So they're advertising it as the way to play that, and it is. It has a second analog stick, so it's absolutely the way to play Monster Hunter. And then secondly, the one game they are releasing for it in this kind of early release is a JRPG, a very popular JRPG in Japan, Xenoblade. And so this, to me, strikes me as sort of an early soft release of the system to see how it works, to see if people are ready for it, and from there they can figure out how to market it to the rest of the world. And so, because the Japanese are getting it this year before, I think it's right around the same time as, I think it's in October, I want to say. I could be wrong, so don't quote me on that. I'm not sure exactly when they're getting it, but it is this year, well before Christmas. We're not getting it until like midway through next year. So, it seems to me that if Xenoblade was going to be the game they were going to release this with, then we would be getting it around the same time as Japan. But because we're not getting it for like until half a year later, that makes me think that there's probably more games in the pipeline for this thing, and Japan is sort of a test bed. Nintendo used to do this all the time. Back in the NES Super Famicom days, they released all of their consoles at least a year earlier in Japan to kind of see how it does, see how their marketing works, and then they would release it in the rest of the world. And so that's sort of what I think we're seeing here, is a soft test release in Japan, and then once they see how that works, they will release it in the rest of the world. Now, the argument, now that I've said all that, the argument for this being a new handheld, with all of that in mind, is a lot of people have said that this isn't a new handheld, this is the DSi of the 3DS line. The difference between the DSi and the new 3DS is the DSi at its core was the same hardware as the Nintendo DS. It had added features. It went online and had access to a shop channel, but its core hardware was the same. The only thing keeping the original DS from running the games that you could download in the DSi shop was that the original 3DS the original DS didn't have a DSi shop. The software itself that you were downloading was completely capable of being run on the original DS. It was not any more complex. You were not using, the hardware itself was not more powerful and was not capable of running more powerful games. Now, the new 3DS has its own games that are retail releases. They are physical games, but if you put one of these new 3DS games into your 3DS, it will not play. Sort of like if you put a 3DS game into a DS, it doesn't work because the DS can't run it. That's where I'm saying that's a generational gap, where the software will not work. The comparison I would draw, the DSi is to the DS as the Wii Mini is to the Wii. Now, I know those released in the opposite order. The less capable one came out second, but it's the same concept. The Wii Mini is a Wii that doesn't have access to the internet, and so doesn't have the Wii Shop channel. Now, so that would mean that the Wii Mini can't play WiiWare games. Does that make the Wii Mini a different generation than the original Wii? No. It's the same generation because it's the same system. They are both capable of playing the same games, one just has access to more games. The DS and DSi, the DSi plays the same games, it just also has access to more games. The new 3DS can play original 3DS games, but the games that it can also play beyond that cannot be played on the original 3DS, not because it doesn't have access to them, but because it lacks sufficient power to run them. And that, to me, that's a generational gap. So that's the alternate argument. And, you know, whichever side you want to come out on, I think it'll be obvious once they release it in America next year, really what their plan is for it. And I'm with you that it's sort of vague right now. It's odd that they chose to release this as just a Japanese Nintendo Direct. And so I think that that's kind of what leads me to think that the Japanese is a very controlled test case, and that we'll see a lot more from this system next year when they release it in the rest of the world, and once they've had time to really figure out how to market it and what this thing is. And pray to God that they change the name, because they say they learned some lessons from the Wii U. Obviously, naming your console was not one of them. Can you imagine the confusion come Christmas time when Walmart has to stock the 3DS and the new 3DS? Those employees will not know the difference between both of them. They can't tell the difference between a Wii U and a Wii. They're definitely not going to know the difference between a 3DS and a new 3DS. And so that's going to cause problems, especially when it comes to selling these games that aren't going to run on the original 3DS. They need to change the name. You know what they should change it to? I was thinking about this the other day, and they didn't use the name 3DX. In Japan, the DX is a very popular, like, you know, it means deluxe, obviously. But in Japanese video games, that's a very regular thing to use. And it also it crosses over here, obviously, more in kind of like the Game Boy Color era. We would get, you know, Super Mario Bros. Deluxe, Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening Deluxe. You know, it was kind of this upgraded version. And that would be the perfect name for this thing. But it's 3DX is a different enough name. It's not just new. Like, I mean, because the 3DS XL is kind of the new 3DS. I mean, it's this, you know, so it creates a lot of confusion. It needs to have a completely different name. Of course, now that I say that, they'll probably go with the 3DS 2, which would be less confusing, but just stupid. So yeah, 3DX, Nintendo, that's what you can call it. It's 3DX. Is that backwards to you? Probably. It's 3DX. I wrote that backwards, so be impressed. Anyway, thanks for watching. Hopefully I sound okay on this crappy headset, and I'll talk to you next time. I think the baby's still asleep, so good job, everyone. And make sure to check out 8worldsnews.com. We're posting a bunch of new reviews up there. Just yesterday, Tyler posted a review of Tepingo 2, and I know he's right now playing both CubeMen 2 and Tesla Grad. He will sit around sending out emails to developers trying to get review codes, and kind of this past weekend, like, I sent out a bunch, didn't get anything back, and he sent out a bunch and got everything back. So he has a large lineup of games to play. So he is a busy guy, but he's going to be posting a bunch of reviews over on the site. If you didn't see my editorial talking about kind of Nintendo's perspectives on releasing this thing, I went into a couple alternate viewpoints that I didn't go into here. So if you want to check that out, that's over at the website as well. And that website is www.8worldsnews.com. Pretty easy to remember. Anyway, I will see you guys next time. Thank you for watching.